Marriage, a word drenched in romance in the minds of the naive. But in Nietzsche's eyes, it's often the most dangerous cage a man can willingly lock himself inside. You are told it is the ultimate expression of love, the completion of your soul's journey, the sacred promise that will secure your future happiness. But Nietzsche saw something else. A trap dressed in white. A social contract designed less for love and more for conformity, power, and the taming of the male spirit. He wrote that marriage is often the will of two to create the one, who is more than those who created it. On paper, that sounds noble, a union meant to bring forth something greater. But in practice, Nietzsche saw that most men enter marriage not out of strength, but out of fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of societal judgment, fear of not being enough without a partner. And fear, my friend, is never a foundation for greatness. Nietzsche's warning is not about avoiding love. It's about avoiding the institutionalization of love. That moment when passion becomes law, when desire is replaced by obligation, when the wildfire in your heart is handed over to the cold, bureaucratic machinery of society. In his view, the man who marries without self-mastery becomes a prisoner twice over. First to the woman he marries, and second to the system that now governs their bond. A man's freedom, Nietzsche believed, is not just physical. It's his ability to live according to his highest values, his ability to be the creator of his destiny. And marriage, more often than not, compromises that. Today we will dive deep into why Nietzsche believed marriage was dangerous for men. We will explore how he saw it as a structure that can weaken the masculine spirit, how it can slowly erode a man's individuality, and how the very forces that society celebrates as romantic are sometimes the ones that bind you the tightest. This isn't about hating women or rejecting connection. It's about seeing clearly. Because once you see marriage through Nietzsche's eyes, you will never look at the altar, the vows, or the honeymoon phase in the same way again. Cool. Part 1. Marriage as the end of desire. Nietzsche believed that desire is a force that drives creation, ambition, and self-overcoming. In his philosophy, eros, the energy of attraction and passion, is not just about sex. It is about life itself. It pushes men to grow, to conquer challenges, to refine themselves in pursuit of what they want. But here's the paradox. Once you marry, the chase is over. The woman you once pursued becomes the woman you now possess. Or rather, the woman the law now says you possess. And in Nietzsche's eyes, possession often kills desire. He saw how marriage turns the thrilling uncertainty of romance into a routine. Instead of two individuals meeting in the dance of seduction and mystery, you now become two names on a joint bank account. The rituals of daily life replace the fire of spontaneous passion. Desire, which thrives on distance and tension, is suffocated by the proximity and predictability of married life. Nietzsche's warning was simple. If you remove the struggle, the pursuit, the uncertainty, you remove the very thing that makes love feel alive. Marriage often tries to secure love, but in securing it, it unintentionally destroys the passion that birthed it. He compared love to a flame. While free, it burns brightly, fed by the winds of unpredictability. But place it in a glass case to protect it, and it begins to suffocate. Marriage, Nietzsche argued, is often that glass case. And so, the man who marries thinking it will preserve his happiness often finds himself confused when the spark fades. He doesn't realize that by seeking permanence, he has killed the thing that could never be permanent in the first place. Cool. Part 2. Marriage as a tool of social control. Nietzsche didn't just see marriage as a personal trap. He saw it as a societal one. He argued that marriage, as an institution, exists less to protect love and more to control individuals. In his time, marriage was a way for families to secure alliances, transfer wealth, and maintain social order. In our time, while it may seem more romantic on the surface, the underlying structure hasn't changed much. Governments incentivize marriage with tax benefits. Religions sanctify it as a moral duty. Society celebrates it as the ultimate achievement for adults. But Nietzsche asked the question few dared to ask. Who benefits most from marriage? Is it the man? Or is it the system that now knows exactly where he lives, what he earns, and how his property will be divided if he ever tries to leave? By tying himself to marriage, a man also ties himself to 1,000 invisible threads, legal obligations, social expectations, financial commitments. Divorce, for many men, becomes a battlefield where the state intervenes to decide not just who gets what, but when and how you can see your own children. Nietzsche's critique was not just about romance dying, it was about power being transferred. Once you marry, your personal life becomes partially owned by the state, the church, or whatever authority governs the laws you live under. Your relationship is no longer just between you and your partner. It's now a contract that can be enforced, manipulated, and weaponized by outside forces. This is why Nietzsche insisted that a man must be absolutely self-reliant before even considering marriage, not just financially, but spiritually. If you do not have control over your own will, if you do not have the ability to stand alone without fear, then marriage will not be a union. It will be a surrender. Part 3. Marriage as the death of individual growth. Nietzsche's entire philosophy revolves around the concept of the Übermensch, the higher man, the self-created individual who refuses to live by the values imposed upon him. He believed that the purpose of life is self-overcoming, the constant process of refining your character, testing your will, and building the highest possible version of yourself. But marriage, in Nietzsche's eyes, often freezes this process. When you marry, you are no longer just an individual striving toward your own highest potential. You are part of a unit, and that unit has its own demands. You cannot simply pick up and change cities for adventure, quit your job to chase a vision, or spend your evenings in deep solitude to wrestle with your thoughts. Your time, energy, and resources are now shared, and in many cases, dominated by the needs of the marriage. Nietzsche warned that too many men abandon their own path for the sake of being a good husband. And while compromise is inevitable in any relationship, the tragedy arises when a man gives up his becoming, his ongoing evolution, for the sake of stability. Stability might feel safe, but in Nietzsche's eyes, it can also be the enemy of greatness. He saw that society praises settling down as maturity. But Nietzsche challenged this. What if settling down is not growth, but decay? What if the man who is praised for his stability is actually a man who has stopped climbing? In marriage, especially when entered into too young or without full self-awareness, a man may find himself slowly transformed from the adventurer to the provider, from the creator to the caretaker. His life becomes less about conquering new heights and more about maintaining what already exists. For Nietzsche, this was dangerous. The man who stops striving eventually loses his sharpness. His mind dulls. His body ages faster. His spirit becomes heavy. And when he finally wakes up to the fact that his dreams have been traded for routine, it is often too late to reclaim them. Thus, Nietzsche's warning. Here is clear. Do not marry until you have built yourself into the kind of man who could walk away from marriage and still be fulfilled. Because if you depend on marriage for your sense of identity, you have already surrendered the most important battle, the battle for yourself. Cool. Part 4. The Illusion of Permanent Love. One of Nietzsche's sharpest insights about marriage was his rejection of the idea that love, in its romantic and passionate form, could be permanent. He did not deny that deep bonds and respect could last a lifetime, but he was skeptical of the idea that the burning desire people feel in the beginning of a relationship could be sustained indefinitely. He argued that passion is, by its nature, fleeting. It thrives on novelty, on mystery, on the unknown. When two people first meet, they are both a little unreal to each other. Each sees the other as an ideal, a beautiful mystery yet to be fully discovered. But over time, familiarity strips away the illusion. You no longer see the dream. You see the human, with all their flaws, moods, and limitations. Nietzsche believed that marriage often rests on the false assumption that the passion of courtship can be preserved forever. Society sells the dream of happily ever after, but this dream is built on the denial of human nature. Desire fades not because the other person has changed, but because you have discovered them completely. The mystery is gone. He compared this to reading a great book for the first time. The first read is full of excitement because you don't know what comes next. But imagine reading that same book every day for the rest of your life. No matter how beautiful it is, the thrill will inevitably dull. Marriage, Nietzsche warned, often becomes an attempt to force the permanence of something that is by nature impermanent. People cling to it out of fear of change, fear of being alone, fear of losing what they once felt. But in trying to hold on, they sometimes kill the very essence of what made the relationship magical in the first place. Nietzsche's advice, though brutal, is liberating. Accept that passion is transient. Do not bind yourself to another person expecting that early fire to last forever. Instead, build a life in which love can transform, not into a prison of obligations, but into a mutual respect that does not depend on eternal infatuation. Cole. Part 5. Marriage as the enemy of male freedom. For Nietzsche, freedom was not just the ability to do whatever you wanted. It was the ability to live without being owned by a person, by a belief, or by a system. Marriage, in his view, too often placed a man in a position where he was no longer truly free. This was not simply about the legal ties or the financial responsibilities, though those were significant. It was about the subtle daily compromises that chip away at a man's independence. The places you go, the people you spend time with, the projects you pursue. All of these now require negotiation. Nietzsche was not against connection or commitment, but he believed that a man must guard his sovereignty at all costs. When you give away too much of yourself, you begin to live according to someone else's values, dreams, and fears. Over time, you may not even notice that your choices are no longer fully your own. In marriage, the shift can be gradual. At first, it's small compromises. Spending weekends with her family, instead of on your hobbies, taking a job that's less risky because it's more stable for the household, avoiding certain friends because she disapproves. But over the years, these small adjustments accumulate until the man's life is a map drawn almost entirely by someone else's hand. Nietzsche saw this as a form of domestication, the same process used to tame wild animals. At first, the wild creature resists, fights, tries to escape. But over time, with enough comfort, reward, and routine, it forgets it was ever wild. For Nietzsche, the tragedy was not that men lost their freedom unwillingly, but that they gave it away willingly, calling it love. And once freedom is given up in exchange for comfort, it is rarely taken back. Part 6. Marriage and the loss of masculine edge. Nietzsche often spoke of the will to power, that inner drive to assert, to create, to push against the boundaries of life. In his view, this will is the lifeblood of a man's vitality. It is the reason men have built cities, written great works, and conquered worlds. But this will, Nietzsche warned, is fragile. It must be exercised constantly or it begins to fade. Marriage, in his analysis, can dull this will. Why? Because a married man's life often shifts from expansion to maintenance. Instead of seeking to conquer new frontiers, physically, intellectually, spiritually, he becomes a guardian of stability. His mission is no longer to push forward, but to protect what already exists. The home, the marriage, the social image of being settled. Nietzsche compared this to a warrior who lays down his sword to tend a garden. The garden may be beautiful, but if the warrior forgets how to fight, his strength decays. The masculine edge, the willingness to take risks, to embrace danger, to endure discomfort, is sharpened by exposure to challenge. And when those challenges are replaced by domestic routine, the edge begins to blunt. He was not condemning love or partnership. He was condemning the slow erosion of a man's spirit when his life is consumed by comfort. Comfort, Nietzsche believed, is one of the most seductive and dangerous enemies of human greatness. A man who is comfortable loses the urgency to transform himself. He begins to mistake the absence of pain for the presence of purpose. This is why Nietzsche's advice to men was so unflinching. If you marry, You must guard your will to power like a sacred flame. Do not allow the security of marriage to rob you of the hunger that made you great. Continue to challenge yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually, even if that means stepping outside the boundaries of what is expected of a good husband. Because in Nietzsche's eyes, a man who loses his edge loses more than his freedom. He loses himself. Cool. Part 7. Marriage without self-mastery is slavery. In all of Nietzsche's warnings about marriage, one principle stands above the rest. You must master yourself before you bind yourself to another. Self-mastery to Nietzsche meant more than discipline. It meant knowing your own values, your own strengths, and your own weaknesses so deeply that no person, no law, and no relationship could pull you off your path. A man without self-mastery is like a ship without a compass. It doesn't matter how beautiful the harbor is. He will still be lost once the storms come. Marriage, in this sense, is one of the greatest storms a man can face. It tests his patience, his emotional stability, his financial resilience, and his sense of self. If he enters into it without knowing who he is and what he stands for, the marriage will shape him, and not always for the better. Nietzsche saw countless men who entered marriage, thinking it would complete them. But what actually happened was the reverse. Marriage consumed them. They became men whose identities were defined entirely by their role as husband and provider. Their ambitions were replaced by obligations, their voice by compromise, their fire by predictability. This is why Nietzsche compared marriage without self-mastery to voluntary slavery. You sign away your freedom, not because someone forced you to, but because you believed the fantasy that love would always sustain you. And when the fantasy fades, the chains remain. His solution was not to reject all connection, but to delay binding commitments until you are so firmly rooted in yourself that even the strongest winds of marriage cannot uproot you. A man who has mastered himself can enter marriage without losing himself. But a man who has not will find that the cost is far greater than he imagined. The choice is yours. Nietzsche's warning about marriage is not a command to stay single forever. It is a call to wake up from the dream that marriage, in its modern form, is automatically the path to happiness. It can be a path to growth, but only for men who enter it with strength, self-mastery, and an unshakable commitment to their own becoming. Too many men, Nietzsche saw, marry because they are afraid of loneliness, afraid of social judgment, afraid of dying without someone to remember them. But fear is a poor foundation for a lifelong commitment. What begins in fear often ends in resentment. The truth is, marriage is neither purely good nor purely bad. It is a forge. For some men, it burns away weakness and shapes strength. For others, it consumes them entirely. Nietzsche's warning is about making sure you are the former, not the latter. So before you think about walking down that aisle, ask yourself, are you free without her? Are you whole without her? Do you know who you are, where you are going, and what you will not give up, no matter what? If the answer is no, then marriage will not save you. It will only expose your lack of preparation. But if the answer is yes, then maybe, just maybe, you will not enter it as a prisoner, but as a man who can share his life without surrendering it. Nietzsche leaves you with a choice. Remain the creator of your own destiny, or hand over the pen and let someone else write it for you. The decision, as always, is yours.